It's good to see each and every one of you here this morning. Glad that you could be here. If you take your lesson number 2, we have dealt with does the universal church have organization? And it's just a technical point, but if I were in a study with someone and they went to 1 Corinthians 12, when there's talking about one body and many members of one body, or I'm in Ephesians that there's one body, there are many bodies of local churches. So what will we be talking about when we go to those texts? Are we talking about the local church? Or are we talking about the universal church? Well, the universal church. Does the universal church have a body? It has an organism, and anything that resembles an organism probably has organization. And so you begin to realize, well, there is organization on the universal side because each individual people that obey the gospel, they're added to the local church or to the church universal. Universal. And that is a body, it has a head, it has many members, and wherever we may be, we're many members one of another. So in a universal sense, that's true. But when it functions, we have a relationship with Christ as head. We have a relationship with one another. Well, you're a Christian. We're brothers. There's a brotherhood. There's not a brotherhood of churches, but there's a brotherhood of individuals that make up the church universal. So a lot of times we don't even talk about the church have an organization. There's no concept of organization with the idea of the universal church. But when we look at just the definitions of what that is, organization, anything resembling a living thing. Does God say the universal church resembles a living thing? Yeah, so I'm sitting down with somebody, so well, define your terms. Okay, let's go. And then all of a sudden, there's no organization of the universal church. Really? But it makes you have to refine your thinking and realize, now how do those people function? And they function in the local church, in local relationship they have with one another. And we're going to see that work presented to us. So we looked at that, and we idea that is the church organized in the local sense, universal sense. I think we've got that down now. I hope we do. After I explained it anyway. Now we ended up last time, the mission of the church to do what Jesus did up on earth. There are brethren today, that's all they need. It's called Christocentricity. Christ central. What did Jesus do? It's central upon him. And we talked about, did he heal the sick? Yes, so let's have hospitals. The church is to function as his body, isn't it? So what did he do when he was in his body upon the earth? We talked about when he came to seek and to save the lost, that's what he did. And he did that bodily, ministering, serving, dying. He gave his life, his body. And so there are those who said that's all we need. The idea of having example and necessary inference and direct command, that's not how we ought to look at things. But what did Christ want to accomplish upon earth? He healed the sick, therefore we ought to have hospitals. He took care of the poor. So we have to have churches set up in the sense of helping poor people and aged and orphans, and have orphans' homes and old folks' homes. That we have the authority to do that because that's what Jesus cared about when he was upon the earth. But what did Jesus do when he left this earth? Did he say, all right, whatever I did upon this earth, I want that to be the standard? Or did he leave it with inspired men called apostles that had a doctrine, which was the gospel of Christ? Did not the apostles do what Jesus authorized them to do in his church? He still had. What did Jesus want to accomplish? I see that in how the local church, as we'll look at it, that's where it is to function, how the local church, what they did. Did they build hospitals? Did they build old folks' homes? Did they build institutions apart from the church in order to do good works? Well, we're going to see. Because the church started in Acts 2, and they were following the apostles' doctrine. What did the apostles teach? How did the apostles direct, local churches? How did Jesus want them to function? I just see what the apostles did. I see what the apostles taught. And I put things in context. I see, did they command that? Was it a necessary inference? Was it an example to follow? And we began to put in together exactly what they did. And that's what we're going to do this morning when we think about the church. But let's talk about, in your outline, the church is organized to function on the local level. This is part 1D. And underneath that, we have organization. And we have bishops, overseers. They're also the pastors. They are the elders. Overseers, elders, men of age and experience. Bishops overseeing the flock, watching over them. Shepherds watching over the flock as well. And they began, they're overseeing what flock? 1 Peter 5, tend the flock which is where? Among you. Well, Church Universal, how do we get it among you unless we do it by Zoom? And that's not really functional very well. I'm over the church there in South Africa, let's zoom in. How y'all do it? It was in the locality in which they found them. We read in Acts 20, the elders of Ephesus, not elders of the region of Asia, elders of Ephesus. They were overseers. Tend the flock, Peter says, which is among you. Is that organization? Is that individuals? Are churches being overseen by a set or a group of bishops? The bishop's function is in the local church. Is it in the universal church? That's how we get Catholicism, the organization of Catholicism. It didn't start that way. You had elders of local churches. And of course the Bible says they were bishops. Well, who became the bishops that distinguished themselves from elders? There was the apostasy going. Well, they were people of big influential cities like Rome, Constantinople. All those places were big cities. So the bishops in big cities began to have precedence over the elders of local churches throughout the region. Well, was that just kind of an apostasy from what we see in God's Word? Elders, bishops are equal. And now we've divided it. I think it'd be better to Jerusalem and Rome and those places. They would be prominent areas, and the bishops began to rule over the elders. And then the bishops, what do? Let's have one. And how do we get the Pope? Papa. How do we get him? He came from the group of bishops, and he began to oversee the Church Universal. So when you read, and you've had the opportunity now to have the passages before you, when you read in the New Testament, organization of the local church is what we began to realize, because there's function taking place. And what do we see in elders? They are overseeing the spiritual welfare, the souls of people. They're not your doctors to tell you how to be healthy. They are spiritual leaders guiding you in the way of the chief shepherd. Do they have a responsibility toward the chief shepherd? And who is the chief shepherd? That's Christ. Yes, they have responsibilities toward him. And there was that following after God's teachings, and they have their qualifications. We see that, Timothy and Titus. But we don't have bishops over the universal church. Where do you read that? Can one be both? I'll grow up and I'll be a bishop over this congregation, and one day I'll be pope. You can't be both at the same time, and I'm not saying they're saying that. But could you be both? They say, well, it's that maybe whichever. Whether universal church, local church, bishop over one, he's probably qualified to take care of a local church. So let him be a bishop over that one. And what do we begin to see among more liberal-minded people of our day when they set up an institution apart from the local church to spread the gospel in the whole world. And we called it Herald of Truth. And who was overseeing that work? The elders at Highlands and Abilene. They oversaw who's going to go preach, how money's going to be distributed, and what were local churches doing. They were funneling their money to the Highlands Church in Abilene, and here were elders over Highlands overseeing the work of all sorts of churches, giving their money. And that's where we had a division among even those who claim to be Church of Christ. Well, they're not tending the flock among them. And what about those elders who are overseeing a local flock? And we see in Philippians and Corinthians that when the money support preachers was done, it was on the basis of the local church functioning. They didn't function through, hey, you elders at Highlands, you take care of that. They were sending it directly to the preacher. I mean, you look back and see the abuses and say, oh, how wise God is. Well, God's wise anyway. I don't care what I think about it. But when you follow his pattern, you have direct connection with the local church's funds with a direct to a preacher you're supporting. No bureaucracy, nobody determining who that's going to be. You have that autonomous right to oversee that work and where that money is going. That's what we try to do. And so the bishops are functioning there. But we also see in Philippians the idea of deacons. Not only were they organized on the local level in Philippi as with bishops and deacons. What is the difference between the function of elders and deacons? We just talked elders, they oversee the spiritual welfare of the church. What do deacons do? What does their name indicate to us? Richard? That's a good distinction. We talk about physical work and they're doing spiritual work, but deacons are, they're assisting, they're servants, aren't they? And the idea of serving a local church, and that may be in areas we don't see them called that in Acts the 6th chapter, but their work is there where the apostles, that they were busy themselves in prayer and spreading the gospel. There's that spiritual function. Those are elders, those are apostles, not elders. But he said, choose among you 7 men of good report. And do we have qualifications for deacons in the New Testament? We could choose, well, these are the ones we're going to choose for this work. But what was the problem there? What was causing division in that local church in Jerusalem? Yes, sir? And it was the Grecian Jews that were Christian. The Grecian Jews were being ignored because the Jewish Jews, people of Jerusalem, those with us, we didn't take care of. So there was a division there. And it's interesting to see the names that they chose indicate these men were, they had Grecian names. They didn't have Jewish names, Stephen. You had people like that. Look after this particular deal. Elders, the apostles, they had their work to do, and it wasn't to wait on tables. Now we talk about that, that'd be a physical work, providing the necessities for those widows who don't have anybody, to provide the necessity of them. You take care of that, and we'll be involved in still doing our work as apostles. Well, elders have their work as spiritual guides. So what do we see in denominations? You have a board of deacons. They hire and they fire the pastor. When you talk about the preacher, you only have one pastor a lot of times. It starts there. You can be, who's the pastor of your church? Well, we got 4 pastors, and that's where a lot of churches are. They got a lot of them, but a lot of times it's just the preacher. That's the pastor in denominationalism. That's the thinking about who's your pastor. Well, you're a preacher. Oh, that's who I'm talking about. And they're not even thinking about that, but it's usually his church. It's usually he's shepherding. And you see a lot of books written, how do you shepherd your church, pastors? And they're really talking about preachers who are in the pulpits Sunday after Sunday, they're teaching, but they're the preachers and not elders who are overseen, because the board of deacons taking care of that. Board of deacons taking care of a lot. Who we're going to hire, who we're going to fire, what we're going to pay. You take that to the board of deacons. They got a lot of authority, power. Well, we don't see that in the New Testament. Don't see a board of deacons determining who's going to preach for us. That'd be elders overseeing the spiritual work. We don't want false teachers. We want to vet them. We want to make sure they're teaching the whole counsel of God and those things. That's not the deacon's work. And a lot of times, elders are good finance people. They're CEOs. They're people that are successful monetarily. And deacons are doing the elders' work, and elders are doing the deacons' work a lot of times. And it should not be that way. We've got to go back to the roots and realize elders overseeing them spiritually minded men, not because they were successful in business. That may have a lot of help in determining man that is qualified, is able to manage, and all those things. You can look at that. But a lot of times, if they're financially successful, you're going to be your next elders. Not necessarily a good thing. How spiritually minded are they? And we look at their families, we look at various things that the Bible says we look at in men that are qualified to be elders, and that becomes they have a function to do. That becomes their work, their function, and deacons have their function, and they do their work. And I think it's pretty well distinguished in the New Testament that we see there. There's that leadership in the area of the spiritual oversight. There are physical things that need to be done. Who's going to take care of the busted pipes that's going to happen the next week in our church? If I were an elder, what would I say? Deacons take care of it. That's their work. I'm not a plumber. And they say, well, I'm not either. Well, you're going to have to learn to do some plumbing. You need to serve the church because we got water spilling everywhere. Now, there comes times when we've had flooding here, and I was the only one here. I'm not a deacon. I'm not an elder. But are you going to let the church flood? And you just get all wet and go, we got pipes up there, and hot water heater breaks. I did turn it off, but deacons came to help, called them. Elders came. We're all going to be servants. But there's how the lights stay on, how the parking lot, all those things, and our deacons take good care of that. And so they have work to do. And of course, we're in the New Testament, you got to have a church building, all these things. But in our time, they're going to be involved in distributing maybe funds and money. As elders said, we're going to help these people. They can be involved in taking care of the organizing so people in the church that need help are going to be helped. They could be involved in that. They should be. We see that in Acts the 6th chapter. So there's a difference in the function, and we don't want to blur them. We don't want to abuse them. But what level is that organization? It's local. It's local. It's not universal deacon. It's not a universal bishops that we see taking hold and being forming how the organization of denominations and organization of the Catholic Church is. Any questions on that question or comments you might have? Yes?
When all the members of the church are pulling their weight, then it makes the job of the elders easier to focus on the spiritual things, and it makes the deacon's job easier.
Yes, it does.
But we can all, just like Jesus said, we can all serve in different capacities no matter what your role is, but it's where do you put your priority in your role?
Right.
That makes a difference.
Yeah. And we can be an easy flock to shepherd, and we can all that. And we can always do our part. And that's a well-functioning thing. But when nobody wants to do it, like one time we came here and a dog had been in the building and messed in the urinal. Pull your own weight. Go clean it up. the men weren't going to do that. Now, did you want them to do that? Well, no, but here's the function. I remember one man as the elder told the deacon, take care of it. Now, he didn't have to beg that deacon to do it. That deacon's going to take care of it. But he took care of it. He cleaned up the mess. And when nobody wants to do the job, it's nice to have those in authority to do that job. Because sometimes the jobs get real messy. And he cleaned it up. And I've always just remembered that. And what was so funny about it to me, that the elder was, the deacon was so serious about, because I came in on the end of that, and I just joked with him. I said, how do you know that wasn't a guy doing that? And he says, guys, I forget what it was. He knew that, well, he's going to mess up my example here. There was no toilet paper mixed with it. That's what it was. That's why he knew it was a dog. Okay. That's what, but I think a man put it there. I don't think the dog got up there and did that. But there was vandalism. That's what happened in the church. But, you joke about those things, but it got done before I got to church that day, before I got to Bible class. Deacons had it done. Elders stepped in. They extended their authority. Y'all take care of that. There's a problem here. There's a problem back in this other room. They cleaned it up. But it's nice to have men qualified. You talk about pulling your own weight from that group that learn to do that. Out of that group can become deacons and become elders, because we see the importance of the local church. You see the importance of local church as an individual member, and you begin to function where you can. You see something that needs to be done, you might want to handle it yourself, that sort of thing. We have trash that comes out on our driveway all the time. What if I just left that? I'm sure there'll be individuals get out of the car and they'd pick that up. I don't think you'd let that stay. But those are little things that come along that we can help. But when you have point of everybody pulling their weight, doing their things together in focus of helping the local church as we are functioning in our community, I think then you begin to have people that are qualified, and there's some spiritual qualifications that they have that's important in this spiritual organization of the local church. All right? Question number 5. How does the organization of the local church, that's what we're focusing on now, how does it function effectively while honoring Christ's headship? And I'm sitting here, what Christ did on earth, his mission, that's what we should be doing. So how does the local church honor that? So how does the local church honor Christ's headship? First of all, what does headship signify? Just a head? What does it signify? Authority, guidance. We'll see in the New Testament, it's also placed to get the sustenance for my life. There's your Christ. There's that spiritual thing that maybe, hey, my stomach and all that stuff, not my head. But that's the headship concept. But there's the idea of rule, direction. The brain tells me I'm going to do this hand, I'm going to do this hand. There is authority to do those things. And it comes from the head. How does the local church honor that? Yeah, and it is outlined, isn't it? It functions as the local church should function. And when we see, wonder what Christ's mission was. What was Christ's mission? Well, we've been emphasizing he came to seek and to save the lost, Luke 19 and verse 10. But all of a sudden we see him in heaven, over his spiritual kingdom, he's head, and he, through his apostles, began to set forth, this is the work of the local church. So now we're moving into organization. We're seeing the local church function in the work that's assigned it to do. Because the local church has assigned work. And it's not build hospitals. It's not take care of the poor by having casinos run by churches. Of course, that would be a problem for some, I guess. But a lot of people are poor, and we need to help the original people in this country. So we have set up casinos. That's what our country does. So they can have those funds. But so we began to see that mission. And what is it? Well, seeking to save the lost. I think that's going to be one of them. But we want to examine from the Word of God the local church. And I'm going to put passages up here, and I want us to spend a little time getting those in my mind, and then I want you to tell me what the mission, what the work of the local church is. So let's look at a few passages, and just come with me and follow with me. Get these in your mind. In Philippians, the 1st chapter and verse 5, Paul is writing to a local church in Philippi. They have elders. He speaks to all the saints in Christ Jesus of Philippi with the bishops and deacons. You've got your members, and they're all functioning as members of one another on a local level. You have bishops and deacons, and right in this 1st chapter, he speaks about that he prays for them with joy for your fellowship. What does fellowship mean? I'm sharing something with somebody else. There's sharing. Fellowship in my Bible says furtherance of the gospel. Because the gospel needs to be furthered. Now your translation may not have that direct concept with it, but it's connected with the gospel from the first day until now. So they had fellowship, sharing, and so here are sharing, and Paul is sharing with them. So let's go to Philippians, the 4th chapter, and verse 15, and see maybe how that was done. It says, ye yourselves also know, ye Philippians, not a universal, not a region, not a universal church, not a region, but a local church, the Philippians in Philippi, that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church, didn't say individual, no church, collectivity of churches or collectivity of individuals. What are we talking about? We already got them organized. It's on a local sense. Philippi had people on a team. They're a collectivity of people, and they're functioning. They had fellowship with me in the manner of giving and receiving. Now I know what sharing was all about. Somebody was giving, and somebody was doing what? They weren't doing the same thing, but they were connected with the same thing in the fellowship of the furtherance of the gospel. And no church had fellowship in the matter of giving and receiving, but ye, Philippi, local church, collectivity of people, but ye. Now, we see a local church functioning. Paul says in 2 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, and verse 7 and verse 8, or did I commit a sin in abasing myself, that ye might be exalted because I preached to you the gospel of God for naught? We're going to look at Paul's attitude toward the gospel in our sermon this morning, Lord willing. And here's a context where he was very careful that he didn't want to hinder that gospel. And a lot of times your enemies say, you're just doing it for money. You're just doing it for money. So what was he doing with Corinthians? He's not getting anything from them, but is he being supported? I robbed other Christians. Nope. He robbed other churches. I thought there's only one church. I thought there's only one body. What are we talking about here? Local church or universal church? Local, because there's a bunch of them. I robbed other churches. Don't know how many, but what did he do? Taking alms from them. I was poor, and they're helping the poor. I took wages from them. He was worker, and he could be worthy of his hire. Taking wages of them, that I might minister unto you. So here we have, in these two passages, Paul receiving Philippi church giving. So local church, one church can do that, but who received it? Herald of Truth, who then gave it to Paul? Was there any missionary, Alexander Campbell, United Missionary Church, when he became the first president of something like that? No, Paul got it from one church. And also, when he's writing to the Corinthians, he said, other churches. I robbed other churches. That's kind of ironic. I took from churches, so I wouldn't have to take from you. And the way you look at it, I guess it might be robbing them. But I took those wages, so I could minister to you. So there's other churches, but do you read other churches funneling things into the eldership of Highlands? No. It's him and this church, him and that church, him and that church, him and that church. Churches were having their part of spreading the gospel, sending directly to Paul. And there was one church and other churches, but they're all local. Are they functioning? They're functioning. Well, in Ephesians, the 4th chapter, in verse 15, when he speaks about the church, he's writing to the church in Ephesus, but this is, is he talking about the church universal or the local church? And he had apostles and so forth. A lot of times, that's the universal church. But in this, how's it going to function like this? But speaking truth in love, we may grow up in all things unto him who is the head, even Christ, from whom all the body fitly framed together, through which every joint supplieth, according to the working in due measure of each several part, make the increase of the body and the building up of itself in love. And so we began to see, well, how would you function as a member and showing love and building up the body? We're building up the universal church. Well, individuals are getting stronger in the Lord, and wherever they might go, that might be true. But I think we see that on a local level, especially in Hebrews, the 10th chapter, when we see this taking place where you're going to have to assemble together. And just the idea of assembling takes away, we're probably speaking here of functioning localities, coming together in a locality. And so Hebrews, the 10th chapter, verses 24 and 25, let us consider one another to provoke into love and good works, not forsaking our own assembling. It didn't say the assembly, it says the act of assembling together, as the custom of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as the day drawing nigh. We have disagreement on what day was drawing nigh. Was it the Lord's day? Was it destruction of Jerusalem? But I want to focus upon the fact of considering one another, assembling together. What was happening at a local level? There were people turning their back totally, turning their back totally. Forsaking, it means I've totally turned my back. I didn't miss a couple of times. I've totally turned my back upon assembling. Why would you do that? Because if I assemble one time, I may be going to jail with your bunch. They were persecuting Christians. I don't want to be identified with them. And especially, I might be identified in spirit, but I'm not going to be there. Totally forsaken. Demas hath forsaken me. Did he just miss him a couple of times? He said, I can't give that today, Paul. He totally turned his back, having loved what? The present world. Look it up. Forsaking. And how do you do? Well, I may start doing that one step at a time. But here in this context, they completely turned their back because they didn't want to fear the persecution. I'm adding that to it. And if it's dealing with Jerusalem, as they saw the destruction of Jerusalem, they needed that encouragement. And that was be on that local level. So here we see localities taking place of assembling with one another for a certain purpose. So we go to Acts, the 2nd chapter, and we observe the sharing of their means. Our time is up, but if you look at those passages, they're the sharing of their means in Acts 2 and Acts 4. There was the Jerusalem church there, and they were sharing among the believers. We see that in their context. And then we see another need taking place, but there's still the need taking care of Jewish Christians. And here were Gentile churches that Paul was taking money from. So in 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, they were taking up a collection for what purpose? Well, I don't want to... They're going to help the saints, the needy saints. And how were they to function? They would take it up on the first day of the week. First day of the week, they would be doing that. Because that was when they would be together. Because we see another thing of Lord's Supper to be taken when they come together on the first day of the week. So we see that. Now, ask someone, what is the work of the church? If you've been to church long enough, what will you say? Evangelism is Philippians 1. Ephesians 4. What will we use? What word will we put there? And you don't have to say my word, but I'm going to have a word up there in a minute. What would that be? Building up, encouraging. We call it edification. Edifice means a building. So I'm building up. So I got evangelism. I've got edification. And what do we see in Acts the 2nd chapter? What's that work? That's functioning on the local level. And helping churches elsewhere. We call it benevolence. Benevolence, helping those who are in need. Paul says, I get wages. People in need are getting the benevolence, and he's going to be taking care of his need because he's a servant working. So you look at that, and I see there's the three function of the church on local level, three works of the church. Edification, evangelism first, edification, and benevolence. And what will we say? Benevolence of everybody? What do those passages teach us? Saints. So we would say it'd be limited. But would you think I might have another arrow up there? I do. Well, no, there's only three works of the church. Really? Well, what about this passage? In Matthew the 18th chapter, verses 15 through 20, we observe that when you have personal conflicts and you don't, someone has something against you, you go to that person. If it's not solved and you bring 2 or 3 witnesses, if that's not solved, tell it to what? What church is that? It'd be local. And we see local churches in 1 Corinthians 5 withdrawing their fellowship from someone. And in 2 Corinthians 2, it worked well because they came back. I find 4 works of the church when we take these scriptures. What areas of work does the local church function? It functions in evangelism. It functions in edification. It functions in limited benevolence. You don't find the church helping everybody in the world. But every time you see the church taken out of their treasury to help those in need, they were Christians. Well, we don't care about Christians. Who takes care of those in the world? People pulling their own weight as Christians. We find a need, we take care of it. Isn't that a functional way of doing things? You're waiting for the government to do it. You're waiting for the city council to determine who gets help. But when we see a need and do that, that's what we're doing. But here was the idea of discipline. And that wasn't on the universal level. It was on the local level of hoping to get those people to come back. Now, that's not a hospital. It's not a daycare center. It's not a bank. It's not recreational place. It's not a political party. Get involved in doing this. But there's our work. And we find that in the New Testament. We'll continue there next time. Thank you.